Hey folks, this is Toli and welcome to more game dev. Last time we left off, we were working on finishing up the remaining castle kind of maps, the Demon Castle zone for the intro first run, and we also did some work on some of the intro cutscenes. I've made some improvements to that workflow off camera, as well as yesterday I spent some time off stream kind of getting builds up and running again. I don't know if I really played the build. I feel like we're just gonna miss this chunk this week. We've been too knee deep to kind of take a step back and really look at stuff. Just trying to get as much as I can done right before the end, and there's just a lot of stuff still to do. So we're not really scheduling as much as just trying to find each next task. Bit of a frantic run to the last few days of our vacation to work on infinite retries to defeat the Demon Lord. As for today, we're going to focus on animating props. It's kind of like the last piece of the map building that I still feel is missing and would add a lot to the experience. So if we open up Unity in here, let's go to scene view and let's go check out maybe even just the fourth room is probably a good example. But in here, I feel like if we just added a little bit of motion to these candles, just a simple animation could add a lot. Even having the plant have like a single leaf move, once every 30 seconds could be pretty powerful. Now, that shouldn't be too hard of a task. It's mostly repurposing a lot of existing tooling that we already have, but just making it work with our new kind of layout. Yeah, so props live in a different area than where we animate like characters, and so I think we just need a different parser for that, as well as it might want to be built directly into the sprites to prop folder is something I'm still debating, but I think let's just get it to the point where we can generate the animations, and then we'll figure out the proper workflow to make it as efficient as possible. Unlockable characters with the early hydration, appreciate it, so that I'm making sure that I have the water bottle, which I do today. Okay, and without any further ado, let's jump into Animate Processor? No, what is it called? If we come into here, Anim Sprite Processor. So this is how we currently turn our animations into like Unity assets, basically. Well, we have autoplay on. That's fine. We can leave it on stranded. We are just going to be a little bit more mellow this morning and just kind of work through getting this up and running. Where does this live currently? This lives under... it's still part of the old JRPG stuff. Okay. That's also kind of a bad part. This should have been transferred over, or at least copied over, to infinite retries at some point. Let's copy this. Let's bring it up to a similar folder, probably not in core, not backend. Could just be in the editor, but I kind of like it in tools a little bit more. It's also possible that editor script should also be down in tools. Folder structure has also kind of degraded a little bit over time. It could use another cleanup, but we will do that on an off day once the vacation is over. I want to focus on content creation as much as possible for now. So in here we have animated sprites. Let's name a new folder called like... Actually, where does the sprite to prop folder stuff live? Sprite to prop. Is that not what it's called? Is that in core? That's where I've added some of the sequence stuff. Sprite to prop. Sprite folder to props. This lives inside of core grid movement. Okay, so it's kind of part of the grid system, So we put it in core. The weird part about that is that we are kind of giving it a direct reference to infinite retries, but that probably should just be optimized at some point to maybe have it so this can be inherited per project. Okay. I still think that is likely fine. So this exists inside of the grid movement stuff because it's related to tiles. These are all props that spawn on specific tiles. So let's move it there. So we'll move the animation sprite processor that we've just made a copy of up into this spot. And then we're also going to rename it to like prop anim processor. I feel like my avatar is moving way more than it did before. Do we need to move this up a little bit more? Or what is going on with my settings? It feels super bouncy today. So bouncy it's actually drawing my eye. That volume's control is fine. My audio levels seem to be okay. Maybe I'm a little more quiet than normal. Let's try bringing this down a little bit so that hopefully I maintain... Yeah, okay, I think that's a little better. Okay, lots of things going on this morning. That is a sign of things to come. We will be streaming with Drixie this afternoon for some art stuff, and we are playing with some of these settings for when we're going to have dual avatars. And so I think I'm just got some of these a little wrong for solo streaming. I might have to like take some screenshots or something and make sure that I'm constantly resetting back up correctly in the future. Where? Oh yeah, here. So anim prop processor. Let's name it that. Let's change the naming on the original. Wow, Unity and Visual Studio are not being in sync today. There we go. So if we look for the original copy of this, this one is currently doing slice sprites. I think this should maybe be characters. And this should be characters. And I guess technically they're both under infinite retries, even though this is in the wrong folder. Sure. I feel like Unity's opening the wrong one. No, it's because I have parented up here. Okay, so this is the original. Yes. Okay, so this is the one I want to rename with this new structure. And then we're going to organize this one under props. Let's rename this to anim prop import editor. This is not going to point to the characters folder, but it's going to point to a similar folder to the sprite folder to props. So it's going to, I think, modify the same spot. Yeah, this class has become a bit of a mess over time. No, I should make it work in the same folder. I'm debating whether or not it should be in a separate folder structure from our normal props, but I feel like it should just work. So we're gonna need to slice all of these. This all seems fine. The main difference is we can't expect that all textures are going to be animations. I think the easiest solution is to get rid of this concept of the JSON file name and instead make it so that if we find a file that we wish to process, this naming is a little confusing. Actually, I guess an even better way to say this is that we are just going to slice the sprites. Okay. So if we take in a series of files that are going to specifically have .png at the end, this will be a list of those PNGs. We should be able to then grab that PNG's name. Or is this actually going to be the straight directory? I think that's the straight directory. So if we just do a dot replace with .png with .json, this should allow us to try and find a JSON file in the folder that has the same name as our sprite. JSON name. And if that JSON name doesn't exist, then, you know, it's not an error, it's just not an anim sprite. Not an anim prop sprite. Okay. Here we're still going to do the same logic to slice. I'm going to clean up some dead code that I think was before when we were trying to parse everything before I actually built the class that replicated the schema for the JSON data from ASprite. Oh, some of what we're doing here is a bit outdated. It's still working. We know it is because we're still modifying stuff, but that's interesting. When we upgraded at some point, this must have become obsolete. Supported by accessing sprite metadata through the sprite. Please use the... Okay, so it's you can no longer access the sprite sheet to modify the data. Please use the sprite editor data provider interface instead. What would be the potential solutions for that? Adding obsolete or disabling the warning. Okay, yeah, no, we're gonna leave that, but maybe we should look into that. Well, it's still supported. It's just at some point, if we keep updating, it will break. And I guess we can fix it then. So if it finds a JSON file of the same name as this sprite, it'll try and slice it. Then we want to come down and do the same thing down here. Yeah. We want to have it so that if it's... Huh. This is where we're making the animation clip, but where do we actually decide? Process directories. Process sprite directory. This is really... that. create animation from sprite sheet is a little more clear. And this is where we're going to replace the hard-coded JSON name with one that is based off the sheet we're loading. So all of this needs to be moved down into each folder that we're processing. Okay. All of this dead code can go. Hasn't been used in a long time, so we can just clean it up. Oh, I see why I had this here, just in case I wanted to always have it so it regenerated. This one no longer has any references. Was that true in the original as well? It is. Okay. Just kind of doing a general cleanup here to get a better understanding of how the system is operating. So then we're going to loop through and we're going to see if we can find a JSON file. If we don't, then this isn't an animated sprite. Otherwise, it'll create an animation controller for it. Okay. That might work as is. See what errors we've got. No errors, good. On the right track. So now we have characters, cutscenes, and props. We're going to clean up this folder structure. So everywhere where we're doing IT parser, I think I want to put the word parser in its structure. This one can be cutscene. Good. Did not hit save all. We're missing chat parser. And the ability parser, here and here. Then we come back to this one. I'm seeing the splice one. Ah, and I made a mistake here, which is why we're not seeing the anim one. Come on, Unity load. Okay, that's cleaned up. So this is for parsing characters. This is for parsing props. Still not seeing a anim props. Tools, IT. Oh, because we didn't change this one. Bad copy and pasting. Okay, now we have a slice and anim. This editor window 1 can go for now. This was a system we had built for potentially kind of editing the sequences in a different way, but it ended up not being very good, to be honest. I just realized that node-based editing for sequences just wasn't good. Editing them in a list is just easier. And then editing them as game objects is even better beyond that. Dungeon room processors probably should have IT in the name. Okay. Most of it's in here now. Particles and tiles. They should probably also be under the IT bracket. Particles, which is pointing at the wrong folder structure, so we actually kind of need a copy of this one. Okay, so we'll leave that one under the JRPG stuff, and then the tile stuff is definitely part of IT. Okay, so if I want to modify something, I come into here. Okay. If we want to modify something, we come into which project ran. And then each of these subcategories have a couple of different options inside of them. So if we were doing something with props, we could hit slice props or anim props. That seems okay. That's cleaned up. So now we want to go take a look at actually adding some anim props, which is going to require creating an example. Do we have any props right now that could be animated? I don't think so, because that wasn't a thing that I was asking Drixie for before. I guess we probably want to do I have it open? This one. This is probably the most important, is having the actual like Omni weapon have this kind of glow effect around it, which needs to be improved, but we could start here. So if we were to export this as a sprite sheet, we would choose output files, give it the same name, need to make sure this is of type array for our data structure to work. Where is this outputting to? The same folder as room decor. Okay. I'm debating whether or not we should have a folder per animation. It shouldn't matter. It's just gonna get a little messy over time. Let's assume that it's in the same spot. Okay, I'm gonna put it in its own folder for now. Just for testing purposes. But I think I'd like to build this in such a way that these props can be wherever they want to be. But I'm just going to do it this way for testing, so that we don't get any weird false positives or something with multiple objects with the same name or something like that. Delete this. Don't need that. Okay, come into here. Let's open up the dungeons, props, Demon Castle. Did I not just make one in here called Anim Props? Where did I just save this to? Export. Export as sprite sheet. Anim Props. Which is there. Oh, I'm looking in the props folder, not the sprites folder. Okay. So if we come into here and we look under this one, we now have this Omni weapon. Oh, but I'm not seeing the JSON file. Did that not get redirected? It did not. It needs to be in the same folder. We should have opened both files, I guess, and made sure that they were both pointing to this location, but that's okay. Now, because they have the same name, if we run the slicer at the very beginning here, that should at least slice the 4 sprites out. It did not, and I did not see any issues with the console. Let's try that again. IT props slice sprites. That does not seem to be doing anything, and we do not have an error message. So I'm going to guess it's just failing to find the JSON file. We'll put a breakpoint in and see what kind of data we're getting at that point. That's going to be further up. So we're going to slice the sprites, we're going to go through the directories, and then here is where we should actually be doing the slicing. This data is also dead code. We now draw the width and height from the actual JSON data from a sprite directly. Enable for this session. Tools. Oh, not completely dead code. Oh, it's needed just for the initialization, but this line is no longer true. Sure. We're no longer actually changing those values dynamically in like every time we want to import. Or we are dynamically changing those values. They're not magic. Okay, tools, props, slice. Not hitting any breakpoints. Perhaps we are pointing at the wrong root folder. Tools, IT, props, slice sprites. Why is it not getting to that breakpoint? Hello, Kazukish. Happy New Year to you. I hope you're having a grand day. Hope the new year has been good to you. So far, at least. It's only been a few days. Oh, it's only been 2 days. Wow. Time feels so compressed. Like, it feels like so much is happening because we're just so focused on just, like, doing as much as we can every day on the side project. I'm really enjoying it. That sounds like it should be terrible, but I'm having a blast. Will not get another opportunity like this for a long time, I don't think, to just focus on something that I'm like really like it's my passion project. Why are we not hitting this breakpoint though? Is there two things with the same name? Did we accidentally name something when we are going back and forth and copy and pasting with this same entry? That's the prop processor, which is this one. IT props, slice sprites. Because if there was two menu items with the same entry, that could be giving us this issue. Nope, not two entries. Let's add a debug.log just to let us know that we got in here, in case the breakpoints aren't working but the prints are. Oh, we are getting there. So we're getting there, but we're not hitting any breakpoints. Let's debug, delete all breakpoints. Let's stop. Maybe we attached to the wrong Unity instance. Put the breakpoint back in. Enable for this session. Or maybe I didn't accidentally denied it somehow. Oh. What did I click? Oh, this is probably just the debug actually turning on. Cool. Perfect. That looks good now. Props, slice sprites. Okay, we're getting in. So the location of the folder we're going to try and modify is assets, infinite retries, content, art, dungeons, props, sprites. We're going to try and slice any sprites that we find there. We do not find any, which makes sense. But we should find some base directories underneath. We find 3, Demon Castle Forest template. Perfect. We're then going to process those ones. We're going to go through the Demon Castle. We're going to find nothing at that route because there should just be more directories. And we're going to see 10 directories here, one of which is anim props. So we're going to go through here. We're going to try and process anim props. We are finding files here, but these are going to be these ones, and none of these should have any JSON files associated with them. So we should get in here, find a JSON file name that is the exact same name as the PNG, and we don't. So we move on. Okay, that is working correctly. So then we're going to come back in here and we're going to check the next directory, which is anim props, which is the one we're actually looking for. This one's going to find one file, which is going to be the PNG. It is then going to try and find a JSON file with the same name, which should be assets, infinite retries, content, art, dungeons, props, sprites, demon castle, anim props, omni weapon display, JSON. That should come back with something. It does not. Ah, because we only want the end. In fact, in this case, because we're using the original, we don't need to combine the names. We just need to give it the name because this already has all the directories combined inside of it. Okay, cool. We need to do the same thing in the anim section. That was the one part I wasn't 100% sure on when writing that, was what the actual value of the string name was going to be. But easy fix. Props, slice sprites. We are getting here again. Done slicing. And it does look like we did successfully break that into 4 sprites, each one with a different perfectly aligned entry. Good. Now we should be able to do the prop anim, which should make a animation controller. But it did not make any actual animations inside of it. Now that's because we kind of hard code a little bit of the animation system. So we expect it to have these animations inside of its tags. And then we have special logic for some of those. So we expect that hit will have a like if check parameter. Meanwhile, these ones are integer based. Yeah, so this isn't even the creation of the actual parameters. This is just hooking up all the transitions, I think. This part's still the thing that I don't love. I don't love that we have to kind of hard code the names of each of our animations. But there isn't really a good way of reading this data from the Sprite file. Like, we could just read the names, but we won't know whether or not it's a looping animation or a trigger animation or an integer-based animation without having to put a lot of data inside of, like, the tag string. Yeah. So the question becomes, do we... Well, this is a point someone made. I think Lorenzo Dev a few weeks back made a point that the hard coding strings was not great. And I think that's very valid. We should probably rip out all of these different strings. Yeah, and the reason we have to do this is because oftentimes inside of Sprite it's something more like this, but we want to simplify it down to just be like the parameter name. Sure. So what we'll do is we're going to make a dictionary of string values. Actually, I think this might just want to be a list. Parameter names. Yeah, because each entry is the same in this situation. Yeah, this just wants to be a list. I might see a case where we want the string ID we're looking for and the string parameter name we create to be different at some point, but for the time being, I think it's okay for them to be the same. And then this is going to change from doing a check to see if the name contains a specific thing to a for each loop that's going to loop through all the string values, parameter names, in the parameter name list. And then when we find a name, if the name contains the parameter name, then we return that parameter name as the value. Then we just need to add all of these strings to that list. Kazukish with the 13 months of Twitch Prime. Appreciate you. It's always awesome to see someone doing their passion. Yeah, I feel like we've been doing okay lately. I'm definitely pretty tired today. I feel like I just didn't get a good night's sleep, so I'm a bit more low key. But I also know some people enjoy that as well, so I'm not going to be too upset at myself on that. And this is a pretty low-key kind of problem solve. It's just like we're taking our animation system we already use for our characters, and we're just going to make it work for props as well. So it's not even writing any new code as much as it is just like, I don't know, just like making existing content work. There's another half to this. So the other spot we use this is in here, which looks like the majority of them are if-based. This one for idle is if not for every other key, basically. I'm wondering if it makes sense for this to not just be a string value, but also just be like, what type of animation condition is this? Essentially embed some of this information inside of there as well. Try and get rid of as much magic numbers as possible. Yeah, let's give that a try. So the data that we care about is the anim parameter data. This should be an internal class that shouldn't be needed outside of this one ever. It's going to need a string for parameter name. It's going to need a whatever the heck this enum is, animation controller condition. We're still going to be essentially writing the hard-coded stuff somewhere. In this case, it'll probably be on the running of the call. So when we actually hit the button, we'll start by constructing this hard-coded list of data. But at least it'll all be in one spot, opposed to having a couple of different spots where we're having to add hit. And then the threshold amount. Now that is dynamic for the loop one. The loop one doesn't even have it. It's just a if parameter is not set, then we can enter into the idle animation. But for the equals variation of the thresholds, we will need to give it some information. And then instead of this being a list of strings, it becomes a list of anim parameters. We can't just set the data here. We'll need to construct this data not at slice, but when we go to anim, we'll need to construct a list of all of the parameters. So we'll need a constructor. Public anim parse data, and then this will take in a string for the parameter name, an animator condition mode, and an int value for the threshold. Okay, and then this is equal to parameter name, etc., etc. And then every single one of these is going to need to be initialized. In here. Minimize this. We've lost parameter name. I'm going to go grab that from the original. So we're going to need every single one of these. So each one of these will need to exist. And they'll also need to have an animation control, the majority of which are going to be if and 1 for their values. So then we add a bunch of these. We're going to have one for shoot, bash, slash, hit, cast, melee 1, death, interact, violin, which is mostly for fun and we're not actually using anywhere, but it's a fun animation to have. Magic cast. Run. Get up. Dizzy. Kick. Shove, and walk. Let's minimize this so we can see this better. So we have shoot, bash, slash, hit, cast 1, melee 1, death, interact, violin, effect cast 1, magic cast, run, get up, dizzy, kick, shove, and walk. So those are all the animation parameters. And so if we use this same list here for get animation parameters, we're just going to need to, instead of just directly getting a parameter name, we're going to get an animation parameter data. And then here we will get the parameter name and then return it if this is the correct one. So if a tag name includes a parameter name, then that's the parameter name this animation tag should use. And then here, all of these are triggers, and I'm going to double check to make sure that these are all correct, but we've got walk, hit, cast 1, melee, interact, violin, effect, run, get up, dizzy, kick, shove, slash, bash, shoot. That looks to be all of them. Bring them down here real quick to just make sure I'm not missing any. But I see walk, I see hit, I saw bash, slash, and shoot down here. I see cast 1. I see melee 1. I see death. I see interact. I see violin. Effect cast 1. Magic cast. Run. Get up. Dizzy. Kick. And shove. Okay. So now, instead of doing this huge if statement, we can do this same loop here. And if that name, which is once again should be more accurately tag name, exists inside of this parameter's name, which is this value, same name, then it will add one of these given this animation data. I guess I could have just used animator condition, but then I wouldn't have been able to construct my own constructor. It's fine. Okay, so we'll just add this data here. This is all at tool time, so like it can be slow. It's not the end of the world. No. Threshold. Okay, and now we can get rid of this massive chunk of if statements. So, if we want to add a new animation name, we just have to add it to this list, which is more centralized and easier to read. The question is, like, what is the naming convention for props? Like, what are their animations called? I don't feel like it makes as much sense to have them be like shoot, bash, slash, hit, like have descriptive names for them. It probably, to me, makes more sense to have like a generic naming of like anim 1, anim 2, anim 3 for different props, because I would expect the majority of our animation props are only going to have a single animation associated with them. Because if we make a new animation for every single one, like if we had, say, this one here, and this was named like glow or something, and then we had another one inside of the red tapestry, and this one was called like wave or something, then I'd have to keep adding to this list constantly. So for props, I feel like it's probably better to just have a generic name associated with them. Yeah. And we can have like anim 1 through 5. For props to use as they see fit. So if we come back in here, let's give this a new tag. Anim 1. I think we still wanted to have southwest. Well, we're not going to be rotating the prop in this way, actually. Ooh, this might cause problems, but we give southwest, northwest to our characters, which we have not opened one in a while. But if we come back up here and take a look at our characters, NPCs, hero formatted, this one here has like a get up this way, and it has a get up this way. And that's because as we move around the map, our character changes facing. But our props aren't going to change facing. So it doesn't feel right to me that they would also have logic to kind of create multiple animations for that. In fact, we can change their facing by rotating them in some situations. And if we want to have a like flipped one because of like lighting concerns or something, like we want to make sure that, you know, we're not just flipping it along its axis because the way that this thing gets flipped maybe causes the lighting to look weird in a certain area, we could just make a separate prop. Okay, I might regret this decision later, but the simplest version I think is that this thing just doesn't have southwest, east-west built into it. Because we kind of already do that kind of flipping along the axis in other ways through the prop tile editor system. So these are going to the right spots, right? This is going to go to the anim props. Yes, and this is going to go to anim props JSON file. Yes, and then we can export that again. The JSON file will now have that extra information inside of it for the tagging of the animation. So if we come in here, we shouldn't need to rerun the slicer. But if we do anim props, we should now generate a 38 Omni Weapon display anim 1. And if we open this up, that should be in here pointing at this one. Now, that is an interesting point. It will have a transition, and that transition will say nothing. I feel like there's a bug here. In the system we just made, it should have generated a parameter for that. Anim underscore 1. Yeah, that's the same. It should have found that parameter name and added a thing. It also didn't find the parameter name for this one. Okay. Let's try seeing if this is a problem because we got rid of Southwest. Mostly concerned about just the JSON file at this point because nothing's changing in the image itself. Okay, now we have a southwest and a southeast. And these are still just directional. So it's not adding that parameter. So something about the way we wrote that for loop is not working. Okay, back to debugging, I guess, because it should have at the very least created a parameter inside of this object. And we're only seeing direction, which is also funny because we don't have direction in this thing. I must be hard coding the direction parameter. Yeah, I am. But it should be looping through all of these and also making them, and these are constructed based on whether or not this thing has a parameter name. So this is coming back incorrectly. Where'd Unity go? Come back, Unity. Props, anim sprites. Okay, so here we should find that anim1 should be the name here, and we're not finding that. And this has a count of 0, so this did not get constructed. Interesting. Is it because of that declaration? Can't imagine it would be, but I mean, realistically, because this is static, we could be doing this on enable as well. Oh, but this is an editor window. This isn't an editor window. It's just a mono behavior editor with a menu item. So I'm not actually sure how this works in terms of like the instancing of that actual object. This is saying it's never going to get to this breakpoint, which is very interesting. No, it gets here. It's currently null, has a count of 0, Has a count of 1. Okay, so it has all this data inside of it. There's 22. Okay, so then if we go forward and actually check the parameter name, this is going to once again check for that. And the parameter names are null by the time we get here. So there's something about making a static list inside this object that is not working the way I would expect it to. To be fair, I don't work with statics a whole ton. These menu objects are one of the few spots where this comes up. How do we store this data in such a way that it is maintained? I mean, easy approach would be to pass this data down through once we construct it. I know for sure that would work. But I find it a little odd that it's getting lost just from here down to here. This is happening inside of the create animations from sprites, which is happening here. Okay, let's try that again. I'm just curious when that data gets set back to null. Like, why is the data being lost? We have a list. It's doing its thing. Yep, doing its thing. Oh. Like, as soon as we finished that, it like just warped us to the next breakpoint, even though I was asking it to walk forward one line at a time. Well, another thought. Do we want to construct that? This is getting used here as part of this function. No, I don't want to move it anywhere else. This seems like the right spot for it. We want to do it at the very top. We could do it up here in some way with like a default constructor. Don't know if that's going to be much better, but we can give that a shot. If this doesn't work, we'll pass it down through every function instead. Copy. Paste. Oh, right. The way that works is a bit awkward. I need to make all the space ahead of time if I want to try and shortcut my way through this a little bit easier. So what I'm doing there is I'm holding Alt and then multi-selecting multiple lines. And then I just need to replace this with commas. Still should be faster than rewriting all of this by hand. If I want to be kind of really clever, I could do like a find replace in selection to like just replace all the bracket colons with commas in this area. But it just feels faster to do it by hand. It's probably not, but we're already done. And I'm just going to bring this one in. Okay, now if we initialize it like this, is that going to hold the data? There's also a high chance that this is going to be meaning, because it was getting set back to null, then it's probably going to be rebuilding this data continuously. Is that a reality? That can't be right. Actually, that's a real concern. It's still at editor window, but if it's doing it all the time when I just have the Unity open, that could be a problem. It might just be every time I run the command, though. Let's see what happens. So we come into here. Our breakpoints have moved on us. Well, it made the thing, so I think it worked, but I still want to see it in action. So if we move our breakpoint... Yeah, now the data's correct. So if we set it here when we start this anim sprite, it is lost by the time we switch functions, basically. But if we have it so it's just part of the initializer, it works correctly. It could be slowing down the editor, I'm not entirely sure. But let's accept that it's okay for now. Because that type of initialization shouldn't be too crazy. Okay, so now we have it so it's actually giving us this anim value. And each of these now require that condition, which is a bool, to be true in order to switch to that animation. We should be able to get rid of the southwest part. That was just me trying to see if that's what the problem was. And we should be good to re-export as an array. Let's delete everything in there here. And then let's run here. We can probably stop debugging at this point. And we'll even delete all breakpoints to clean up after ourselves. So we have one process to anim sprite. Okay, so then the question becomes, do these animations need an idle? My gut says yes. Because we may want to have it so these are... able to be in a non-animating state by default. And its idle frame is nothing. So we come in here, the idle frame for this, if we open a Windows animation, is going to be just having the sprite set to... Oh, it's the wrong frame. Oh. Wait. That might make sense. If there's nothing here... No, it makes an empty sprite. Did these go to the... Oh, it went back to the original folder. That's funny. But this didn't. Okay. So now we need to re-splice this so that it has all the frames. And then we do an anim sprite. And that anim sprite is going to point at a empty first frame of transparency. And it'll be up to each one to decide what its idle frame is. So in this situation, this one's idle frame is probably not what I've given it. It's probably just that. And I actually think I want one more frame. Can I paste a layer or a frame? I can. We're going to move this outside of that. And this will have another tag for anim 2. And this one will have it removed. Interesting. So this is one way we can do this. If we do it this way, we will generate more sprites than we need. Okay, how do I explain this? So there's kind of like this constant thing, and I've talked about it a bit before, but like you have to kind of make a decision between memory and performance. And I think our performance is generally pretty good, but I'm always looking to make our performance a little better. And usually in order to make your performance better, one of the easiest ways is by adding more memory. So by making this thing a little larger, what was the original size of this thing when it was 4? It was 48 kilobytes. So by adding an extra 2 frames, we add an extra 10 kilobytes to this object. It would be cheaper if instead of having this as one animation with a object on, object glowing, and object missing, to instead have it set up as 3 different pieces. We could have it as just the base, which we have, and we could have it as just the like relic object in the center, and then we could have the glow animation be something completely separate that doesn't have any of these other pieces inside of it. But if we do it that way, then we have to control the disabling and enabling of the object elsewhere, and we'll need to control the positioning of all this stuff, and we'll have to have 3 different sprite renderers in the same spot. And I know that each sprite render is a set pass in the render code, so it's actually going to be somewhat expensive currently to have all 3 of those. I feel like there's still a world where we take every one of these sprites and convert it all into an atlas, so hopefully we can reduce the number of set passes we're producing. But for the time being, I think I'd rather just have this be one sprite renderer with all 3 kind of states baked into it. The state where we have the object, the state where we don't have the object, and the state where it's glowing. But there's a real world where this should probably just be 3 different sprites, and the glow part should be the only part that's actually an animation. I'm going to think on that. My gut says that I'm doing this wrong, that this is probably more performant, but probably at too large of an impact on memory, because this pattern, yes, it's only 10 kilobytes right now, but if we keep up this mentality, it'll, to every animating prop we ever create, it could get very expensive. Let's try a different example and see how that feels. Another good example could be the torch candles. Yeah, let's do that. So if we come back into here, go into the candelabrum. We should probably try a version where we make these lights animate. Yeah, and immediately I see a case where we could do that, where we have a different frame for every single one of these. This needs to be done better. For the time being, let's just try doing it this way. Let's say that's the animation. It's not a good animation, but let's say that's the animation. Really, we're only moving these top flame pixels, which means that if we do this the same way we just did the display here, even though this one's kind of modifying a larger part of the canvas, this one is only really modifying a very small portion of it. And maybe the frame rate's a little high. This is not really to my point, but I'm just gonna tweak this down a bit. So instead of just, that was way too slow. Instead of doing the same thing we did before, we just give this a tag for anim_1 and then export this as a sprite sheet where we have all this data. What we could instead do is we could try and remove all of the under parts below the flame from every one of these frames. So essentially like this, go here, delete, go here, delete, go here, delete. Oh, it didn't keep my selection. That's annoying. But if we do it this way, this allows us to reduce the canvas size of this prop significantly. What I meant to do was this, but my brain autopiloted to the wrong one. Now this animation could just be this. And what's nice about doing this is we also have multiple heights for the candelabra. We have a 42 and we have a 58, and they're of different sizes. And so we could remove the fire from both of these and have them both share the same animation as a separate piece on top of wherever we place the candelabra. Let's make a new version of this one. I'm gonna need to export this as a PNG. As a PNG, but we're gonna do it to the anim folder, anim props. We can get rid of the word sheet from this. And then this one should go to the same folder here. Array, export. Then we can undo back. Oh no, let's keep this here. Let's save as flames, and we'll make this an A sprite file instead. Now we should be able to reopen the 42 variation, and we can pull the fire off the top like so, and we'll save this one out as a separate file. Okay, export that. Now we can come in and actually re-import all the sprites. This isn't quite gonna work. Interesting. There's a bit more work we have to do still before this. Let's at least make sure that our animation work that we have been doing is still working. So if we slice this, we get 4 variations of this. And then if we do tools, props, anim sprites, we should get another folder of animations, which is here, which only has one anim 1, and we have these 2 variations here. And we can collapse that down if we want. The problem now becomes when we do sprites to folder, it doesn't know anything about those animation files, and so it's going to simply make these as PNGs. Let's see how that functions. So this should make a series of props. It's going to have a new folder for these. Yes. And it's only going to find the topmost sprite name, which is technically actually this object. This, I guess, isn't a sprite. This is a texture in this situation because it's a multi-sprite now. Something about the way the formatting of the data works. But it's essentially just finding this one and making just a prop for the topmost version at that file path. Neat that works at all, to be honest with you. But this is probably all fine. We need it so that instead of making these variations, it does... Well, I guess actually this is still fine. The real problem is that we just need to hook up an animation controller to it. So this one here is the candelabrum, so it just needs to have this here. And I think that'll cause it to animate correctly. So is that the only step we need to do when creating one of these variations? Also, I want to go back to this one, undo all of this, and then go back to this layer. Actually, before I accidentally mess this up, let's also save as this as an A-sprite file. Yeah, we should be able to save over this one. But let's just output, export, visible layers, selected frames, not as a GIF, but as a PNG, because I just want this to go back to being a single variation. Yes. Cool. So that that's not showing multiple versions. It's slightly distracting to me. Okay, so if we come back in here... Wait, what time is it? No, that's right. We've got half an hour left until lunch. Okay, I think we're gonna get this done today. Or at least in this stream. We definitely get it done today. It's just a question of whether or not we'll finish it up in the next 30 minutes. So if we come into here and we do we got to populate the new data. There's 3 new variations. If we come in and make a center prop with the no flames variation, then we add a custom anim prop for the candelabrum. That's going to be down on the floor. Oh, does that work? I hit undo at some point, which broke things. This kind of doesn't work for a number of reasons. But mostly because the angles aren't right. And we don't have full enough control to line them up in all situations. Well, maybe we do. Still not exactly right. And you can really actually see that down here in the zoomed in variation. That's a little high. But now it needs to come forward a little bit. But now that's too much. Like, it's just gonna be really hard to line this up if it's not positioned exactly the same. Okay, well, so we can't shrink the canvas size. We need to do a test here. If we do a return to the regular size where they were, and we export this to the same folders. Yep, that one's good. And that one's going to anim props as well. So if we re-export this data with the proper height, then we should be able to reset this one's height back to 0, 0. And bring it forward to -2. Where did it go? It should be right there. We probably need to reslice it. Yeah, we need to reslice it. So it is in the same plane right now. But it still doesn't line up correctly. Fascinating. It's a couple pixels off. Are the canvas sizes identical? This was originally a 42. This is still a 42. So why... Props, slice sprites. Props, anim sprites. Let's clear it and restart just to be sure. But I would imagine if I put it at center and I give it the same sizing, it should line up perfectly the same. Oh, wrong one. But it does not. .42 high. Yeah, only the width changes. But somehow that makes it so it doesn't line up if you have two props in the exact same positions, which they're both center aligned, which I suppose we could validate that part of it too to make sure that there isn't an issue. Let's make it so that they're both using this logic, aka the custom variation, and then clear this one. No. Did we shrink the size of no flames? Like, let's do a different test. What if we just use the one with fire as well? Nope, those line up perfectly. And overlap exactly as you would expect. And I can physically see it drop down. That's so odd. So if there's empty transparency below, Unity seems to be doing something where it's actually modifying it in some way. Oh. They each have a different pivot point. Oh, that's a neat bug. Unlockable characters with the hydration, but I think, yeah, we'll take that. We'll take the hydration. I should drink water. When we splice these sprites, we do hard code a little bit of an offset in them. Wild. Why do we do that? And we do that for the characters too? We just must want the pivot point to be slightly above the ground, or at least at some point we wanted that for animating sprites. Yeah, so when we slice stuff, we were just giving it a slightly different pivot point than what we would do normally for a prop. Okay, well now they're aligned correctly, so that problem has been resolved. So we could have two custom props, or even we could go back to just having this one be a default center type, no flame, and then we can clear this one. So we could have two props overlapping each other. But this is now going to draw... Like, are we saving a lot by doing this? Actually, rather than resizing, maybe it's just easier to just double-click the window to get a full-screen variation. Oh, we also didn't save, so it didn't bring in that new set of props. I see the prompt for raycast done. Excuse me. Let's see if that's working. Oh, interesting. Okay, yeah, that's fair. So they are not looping animations. I saw it play one frame just because we happened to get up here fast enough. That's a different bug. If we just add looping, I believe that is the keyword. And we will want that tech. We'll want to be able to decide whether or not it's a trigger animation or a looping animation. So we'll do that, and then I believe if we re-import everything, shouldn't need to resplice because we're just modifying the metadata. That does make a looping variation of it, which is the one we should be going to. Let's just delete the old variation. Something I maybe should do every time we generate is just delete everything, but then it causes like issues with like regenerating GUIDs, which has problems with source control. Okay, so if we come into here, now we're going to this looping animation, and this looping animation is fine. If we come into here, this is set to loop time. Okay, so now that should play continuously over and over again. It does not. In fact, I don't think it's playing at all. Let's go scene view, click on the flames. Oh, but of course, we need to reattach the animator again. So if we come back into here, because this is a manual process right now, we deleted the animator. This is the other reason I don't like deleting it, but it's helpful sometimes to regenerate everything. Oh, and this thing gets very confused because it still sees it, I think, but it doesn't know that it exists. Unity gets upset when I delete the animator controller. I should have just deleted all the states inside of it and the behaviors, or the motions, I guess is what they're called. Okay, so now that's animating. It is complaining because it's missing a behavior that we would like to have on this. That's going to be honestly a problem with like the base one. All of these inherit from base prop, I'm pretty sure. And I'm going to just make it so base prop has a animation event receiver on it. Yeah, we'll go with this for now. That's going to modify every other prop, but it's fine. It might be that we want to have an animation base prop and a non-animation base prop. There's some amount of code that's kind of odd here. Yeah, because this is now causing problems where some of these things on start aren't finding an animation. How does this work again? When we make a new animation, we give them events for when they're complete. Here. And this event process essentially looks for a game object on the, or component on the game object that has the animator, and it tries to find a function with the name process animation complete. I guess even more accurately, it needs to have that animation parameter set up correctly. So this needs to point at this animator, number one. And number two, this only runs if the animator is null. So, okay, so we don't need to worry about the unit aspect of this if we just do that setup. Okay. So we need to go back into base, come into here. We need to drag this reference in here so it gets the animator, so it doesn't try and find it. Doesn't try and find a unit to get the animator from. Okay. Now with an animation receiver and still errors, because sometimes it doesn't find an animation runtime controller. Which is probably a fair check I should be checking against. Okay, now it should find no errors. But every prop having this on start script is kind of, again, an inefficiency. So we probably do want to have a base prop that we're using for non-animating props. And then if we detect that this is an animation prop, we should use a version that does have the animation receiver and controller hooked up on it. And we should also try and add the animation controller of the same name. Okay, I'm starting to see the pieces. It's coming together. Last thing I want to do before I move on with like hooking up the rest of this like prop creation stuff that I'm literally talking about right now is I do want to just double back here and see what is the size of this. This is 9.2 kilobytes. And the way that we currently have this set up, we're going to have an extra render pass because we have two versions of the sprites. So there's like this kind of, there's this balancing act of, do we want to have two sprites everywhere, or do we want to save more memory? So we'll start by double checking my assumptions around there being two frames. So if we go to frame debugger, enable this, go to frame, say 10, go forward a bunch, we're going to render everything, all the walls. Yeah, so right now we're going to render the fire, then we're going to render the actual like candle stand as a separate prop. So that does mean that there's two set passes, which does have some amount of cost And if we're doing this for every single prop that we might want to animate as like 2 different pieces, this will get expensive. So how much memory are we saving by not just saving out the whole candlestick? Because we're already having to do the entire object. If we could find a way to position it perfectly, what would be the best case? What would be the best case for memory? This goes down to 1 kilobyte. Okay. So that actually does get a pretty large amount of savings. Okay. If we go back to this size, which is what we currently have to do. Oh, wrong button. Shoot. Export PNG. If we go back to this size, we're at 9. And if we were to turn some level of compression on, it wouldn't even compress it for some reason. Okay, well, if we do a low quality compression, does that work? No. Because it doesn't like the fact that it's not a multiple of 4, apparently. Alright, well fine. What if we made it a multiple of 4 then? Then we can drop it back down to 2 kilobytes. Okay. Okay, so we could reasonably save in some situations like this where we're mostly only animating the top. Like 80% of our memory on a sprite. If we turn on compression by having them as 2 different sprites. But if we leave it as 1 sprite, we're going to take up more memory, but the game will be more performant. I lean towards more performant right now because we're literally talking about kilobytes. I did make a build yesterday, and I believe our entire build was 100 megabytes. Now we still want to add a lot more sprites, and we're really only 1 zone, and we kind of want to have like 10 zones. So maybe the game goes up to like a gig. Is that right? Am I doing that math right in my head very quickly? 100 megabytes times 10. Yeah. That's pretty, that seems excessive. A 1 gigabyte game for what is a series of sprites seems not great at our current rate of growth. But there's not just the memory and the performance standpoint of this, there's also the annoyance of having to place 2 props every time we want to add a candlestick. Yeah, okay. I'm going to say that I'm going to make a judgment call that it's going to save us time and performance. Actually, that's a good point too. What if we... No. Oh, shoot, I can't get it back. Okay. What if we do the compression size at once? Like that. Export sprite sheet. We have to do that for every piece. Getting it back to its original form. Export. Okay, so now we can have it be one piece. Which means we can clear this one and just make this anim props. This should still have the animation tied to it for now. It does. This is all set up correctly. Good. What is the performance at this state, though? Virtually identical. So having all that transparency doesn't really seem to affect the performance. I would think having an extra lot of transparency would help with compression. But that was a bad assumption. So realistically, as long as this doesn't affect our pixel perfect look, the high quality compression ideally should maintain the colors. Let's bring on another one. No, the compression does completely mess up the coloring. Okay. Oh, and also if we add the stands, we go up to 10 kilobytes? Or is that because we added the extra space? It's because we added the extra space in order to try and improve the compression. Okay. How do I summarize this? So essentially, if we leave the pieces okay. The states basically are we can either turn on compression, and if we turn on compression, we mess our colors up potentially. It's not going to do it because we're no longer power 4. But we turn on the compression, we mess up our colors. If we separate it so that the flame is only the top 4 pixels, then because of the way that we angle our billboards to face the camera, we don't really have a good way of placing it at this height. So we would still need to have a lot of transparency at the bottom anyways. And if we have all that transparency, that doesn't really help with compression either. So really, our options are leave it all as one prop because it's easier to place. It's better for performance, or we make it 2 props, it's worse for performance, and I have to write some sort of code that like figures out how to offset this a number of pixels up based off the amount of like height we want to add. So if this candelabra is like, I don't know, it's 42, I think is what we said it was. So let's say it's like 38 or something high, or maybe like 36 high, then I would need to figure out some math to like rotate this from a pivot point down here, like raise it up 36 straight up in the air and then rotate it down or something in order to try and find out how to get it in the exact right spot, which I could do, but it's going to take time. And then we have to worry about placing 2 versions of the prop, thus decreasing performance, but saving us a ton of memory. it's going to get more, it's going to be a case-by-case problem too, because this candelabra is a 52 or 56 by 42 texture. But let's say we wanted to have the eyes on this door move. This door, especially depending on the number of frames you want to have on it, these like glowing gems, if we wanted to have them have multiple frames of animations, is going to add up to a lot more memory. Like, I know this thing was 58 kilobytes because of how wide it is, when in reality we're only going to be animating this section here. Okay. I think it's going to be a case-by-case basis. If we're doing something really large with a really large amount of animations associated with it, we might want to try and figure out a way to break it down into multiple different frames or sprites, and then figure out how to align them correctly in the world. But if it's something relatively small, like even this candle stand, even though only a very small part of it is animating, it's probably easier to just make it so that we have 4 sprites for it. Of all the moments that we have worked on this for the last few weeks, I feel like this is like a turning point where, depending on how we decide to animate and work with these props, could lead to the game either being like a few hundred megabytes or potentially a couple of gigs. Okay, I'm gonna vote for the version where it may end up being a couple of gigs, by making it so every single one of these are their own image, because it's going to make adding props easier. It's going to make our life simpler in terms of not having to make multiple versions of every sprite, having to align all of those sprites, and our performance might be a little bit better because of this decision as well. And it means the file size of the game will be a bit larger, but I think it's worth all the other trade-offs. And if we get to a point where this decision leads to the project being like 50 gigabytes for some dumb reason because we just have so many animating props, then I will need to look into building some more optimizations, and hopefully those optimizations will be able to be done in place without having to re-edit and re-add every single prop in the entire game. But I'm going to make the call. I'm going to make the call that we do not split this type of fire animation out into its own sprite and reduce its canvas size and figure out how to anchor it in the world and have 2 versions of each sprite. Instead, we're going to make it so if a prop is animating, we leave it as its whole form and just animate the pixels we want to animate. And we will see where that leads us. If it causes problems, we fix it when they come up. I think this might be a terrible decision, but we got to just keep moving forward. And I'm not going to optimize for problems that may not exist. Again, the whole build, the entire thing, if we build addressables with all of our images and all of our props, right now is like 100 megabytes. And that's, I guess, before we've added any animations and we still have several zones we want to create. But worst case, say we go like, say we add animations, and that's not to every prop, but even some of them. And this candelabra was 9 kilobytes here, but the base one was 2 kilobytes. So essentially we're well, that makes sense. We're timesing it by the number of frames of animation. So let's say we add 5 frames of animation to every single one. That brings us up to 500 megabytes. That's like worst case. Every single prop in the game, which is insane, has 500 megabytes, which is 0.5 gigs. And say we have 10 zones with 500 megabytes of props. That's still only 5 gigs. Let's say we have 2 different animations for every single prop. So we take that 0.1, so 100 megabytes or 0.1 of a gig, and say we have 10 frames for every single one of those, and then we have 10 zones, that's 10 gigabytes. It feels insane for a game that is a series of sprites, essentially. But that's like worst case. That's like worst possible case. Is somewhere between like 5 and 10 megabytes. And if we get there, maybe we find a way to reduce memory in other ways. Like maybe I write like a custom compression or something. That could be a world we live in. Because I really don't love that this is messing with our colors. That seems so crazy to me. I want to see that one more time. So if we increase this to be a power of 4 again, adding a bunch of extra transparency to do so, export just the PNG. Well, no, let's do both. Come into here, slice the props. Looks like that actually worked fine. Yeah. Then we come into this thing, we change the compression to be high quality. Hit apply. Goes down to 2.8. But like the fire here in the center definitely gets duller. So this is saying it's RGBA 8. So if we do RGBA 8, is that this one? That's 16. No, it kind of likes the compression it's choosing. If this is RGBA 16, how do you get RGB 8? I guess you can't. That's only an automatic option? Yeah, you can really mess with the effects here. Like, it just looks so much worse. Oh, okay. This one is basically the 8-bit version. These ones are much larger, though. Okay. And if we choose this one, we can't choose to compress. We have to do automatic, and if we want to have the compression option. That doesn't help. What is the whole size of this canvas when it has all 4 frames laid out? It's going to be 1644. Yeah, okay, times 4 on the side, so 64. So if our sizing is 64 times 44 times kilobyte is 1,000 bits, so 11 times 1,000 is 11,000. 64 times 44 means that there's at least 2,816 pixels. Let's assume each bit is 4 bits. So that's not compressing that at all. Unlockable characters in Twitch chat says, wait, I must be missing something. Why can't you reuse the props? Wouldn't all the candelabras point to the same file? 8 bits is 1 byte, so 8 bits is 1,000 kilobytes? 8,000? Yeah, So I would be able to reuse all the candelabras. My point is just by having 4 variations of this that are all 44 high, when we're only actually animating the tops of them, feels wasteful to me. And so I feel like there must be some system, and this is a rabbit hole, I know I'm going down it, but this is important. There must be some way that we could reduce this file size such that we don't have to have so much memory in place. And so what if I understand what's happening correctly, 64 times 44 is close to 3,000 pixels. You times that by 4, like, bits of information. So each pixel has a red color, a green color, a blue color, and an alpha color. We come out to this value. And so what I feel we could do is we could have some sort of compression that tries to convert the image file to simplify it. So unlockable characters asking, does a pixel being transparent take up less space? That would be my intuition, because what you can do is if the pixel is transparent, so, okay, there's this thing when it comes to compression, right? Where when you have a series of pixels, right? Let's do a bunch of these, like, icon names, or maybe just even text boxes. But say that we have a bunch of these different text boxes, and all of these text boxes are transparency. If you're not compressing at all, and you're just leaving them all the same, then each of them are going to have 4 bits of information inside of them. So each of these is going to be 4 bits, which maybe I should have done before copy and pasting this every time. So each one of these is going to have 4 bits inside of it. Even though all of them are identical, they all have the same information. Internally. And they're all basically going to have the same value. And each of them are storing 4 bits of information. So 9 times 4... My brain is completely fried. If we just say that this is 36 bits of information in here, but each one is only storing 4. Another way you could do this is you could, instead of storing 4 pieces of information, you could have it so that you store 1 piece of information, which is equal to the above value, essentially, which is this value up here, and you could have it so each one of these look for a single index in a list. So if this is a list of values, we can have it so this is index 1 or index 0 more accurately, etc. And instead of needing to store instead of needing to store 4 pieces of information, if you have it so that this entry for this pixel is index 0, you could instead have it so each one of these only stores 1 piece of information, which is its index to the color it cares about. And that would reduce this down from 36 pixels of information down to 9 pixels of information, plus however many different color pixels we have. So say we had, in this image, it looks like this has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different pieces of colors. So 7 pieces of color is going to be 7 times 4 is going to be 28 plus the 9. So in this example, we would save 2 bits of information. But if we have an image that is a massively larger, let's say it's 64 times 44, that brings us back to our original size of this object, and it only has 6 pixels of information inside of it, then we can reduce this by a factor of 4 plus the, what do we say, like 32. So that's still a much bigger savings. And that's like what we call like palettes or color paletting. And I'm wondering if that might save us a lot of memory. To your point, unlockables, you said, couldn't we try having the same picture but only have the flames in it so that you can place it on the prop easily? That's kind of what we walked through earlier with like having it so it was only the fire at the top and transparency below, but that didn't really help with any kind of performance, at least at this stage, because it doesn't look like it's actually doing any kind of compression. It doesn't look like it's doing any kind of compression the way that I would expect it to. Yeah, I tried. I think I've tried every variation, but just because of the fact that it doesn't respect the transparency, just makes it so this is basically not going to work. We can even do a very quick test of like, I can show it again, but if we just delete this whole section, we won't do all of it, we'll just delete most of it. And then re-export the PNG. Unity still treats it as 11 kilobytes, which doesn't make any sense. Like, I feel like you should have some sort of compression on that like fixes that. And again, if we turn on, like, we're also not having any compression on it, but if we turn on the compression, like, these pixels look worse. So this high quality compression is still modifying our colors in some way. I don't want to have to figure out color palettes right now. I've had people in the past, like coworkers and friends, say like color palettes would be really useful for this type of game. And I understand why they've said it, and I've thought about looking into it, but it just hasn't been a priority. But as we get into this idea of animating props, if Unity isn't going to compress this down when the majority of this is transparency. And if I turn on any kind of compression at all, it modifies the color. Then it's just not like I'm gonna need to do something myself. I'm just so surprised it doesn't do any kind of compression at all. Unless maybe it does it at like a different level. Like maybe it compresses the image at some sort of like build time step. What if we change like the max size to be like 64 or something like that? Does that change the kilobytes? No. Doesn't care. Ooh, okay. If we come into here, we get way more options. That still looks terrible. That looks different. I have to compare, but I think that's the least amount of transparency loss we've seen so far, or least amount of color. That like it did shift the colors a little bit though. That's definitely adding more gray. So maybe one of these, but most of these lower ones don't have alpha in them at all. Or just end up being worse. Yeah. I think these three options here are what it's choosing between high, low, and medium compression, because we were seeing that it was giving an error when we didn't have it at the right size, and it was giving an error about these three. So I think these are the same ones. Just messes with the colors so much. Here's a question, Google. Custom Unity compression. No, I'm not seeing Unity create own compression. No, it doesn't look like there's a way to make your own compression algorithm. Okay. Because we have such simplistic palettes and our colors are so indexable, I think doing some sort of palette system could save us a lot of memory. I don't think I'm supposed to solve this right now, but it needs to go in the backlog. Because essentially, I think if we do any kind of palette compression, worst case, we have 256 colors in our palette, which most of our textures won't be using that. It feels like Trixie's going for like maybe 4 colors, shades, and a lot of our props tend to not have a lot more then potentially 2 sets of colors, if not maybe 3. So assuming it's like somewhere in the range of like 12. Worst case, let's say we have a really complicated, like this door has a couple of shades of red, a couple of shades of purple, a couple shades of green. That's only probably 12 to 16 color choices in that door. Let's say worst case 24 times 4 is 96. So even if we took anything of this size, 64 times 44, and then 64 times 44, and then divided that by 4, and instead added the number of indexed values that we need to worry about, which is going to be 100. No, 704 plus 100. We're down to 800 in that situation instead of that, essentially dividing our memory costs by a third. That's huge. Okay. Okay. I'm going to keep with the current plan. We're going to keep doing props this way where they're all in one image. We're not going to worry about separating them. We're not going to worry about only animating the parts that are animating, because then we'd have to reshift everything and we'd have to place multiple variants of things. I broke something. Oh, I need to change this to an array. Yeah, we're going to leave this in its simplest form. And I might need to write something that goes through and converts all of our sprites to paletted versions. And I don't need to do that for the demo, but I may need to do it for the full game release, because the demo will only be like a couple of zones anyways, and it's not going to be that many pieces of art. But when we start getting larger and larger spaces, I will need to take like a week or two to just like convert all of our sprites. And that is annoying, but it's fine. And even then, it wouldn't be the end of the world if the game has to be 5 or 10 gigabytes. I think it could be a lot less, and just a little bit of simple like paletting compression could, I don't even know if paletting compression is the right way to say that, but making it so that each one of our sprites, instead of storing its individual values, instead stored an index to a indexed color, would improve our memory, as well as give us the ability to quite literally swap the palette of the game. And if we swap out the palette, everything in the entire game would change color, because it's only based off index values, not based off of actual RPG or RGB values. Okay, I've rambled on this one for a long time. This was a long rubber duck for me. I know it was a bit of a rabbit hole. Sorry if it was incomprehensible for some, but it's just, I'm just annoyed by the fact that like each of these individual pieces aren't having some level of like, hey, there's extra transparency, compress it down, but don't mess with the color. I'll do some digging. If anyone in like the comments or something who comes across this video has thoughts as well, appreciate it. But I'm gonna say that the benefits of just keeping it all as one image is going to be better for designing the space, it's going to be better for performance, and it's going to potentially lead to a larger game file size. But the file size is not the end of the world. It'd be worse if the game ran worse, or if it took it longer for us to actually make it. I'd rather have a larger game than a game that is going to take forever. We are overtime on lunch, but the next stream isn't until 2 or 3 today. Yeah, Drixie's going to be streaming with us at 3 to 5. So let's take maybe 15 more minutes here, and let's see if we can finish up this idea of having the props actually be loaded in correctly. If we go sprites to the sprite folder to props script, when we import sprites, right now we're just getting the PNG and just setting that inside of the sprite renderer. But we should also do a get animator inside of the child and set the controller, runtime controller, not equal to the sprite, but equal to the controller path. So what is that going to be? That's going to be not tile path, but it's going to be the path to the tile. No, because that's going to replace sprites. So we need the source file element value. That's the sprite. The folder name, does that have everything? No, that only has the current folder we're in. So we need access to this value, the unreplaced sprite version. This also isn't the tile path. This is like the prop path. This is a renaming of, or reusing of the tile script problem. Everywhere that says prop, it should be, or everywhere it says tiles, it should be props. So we want to have the sprite path, which is going to be source file elements. I think this is what we're looking for. So this is going to be the path to the sprite. And then using that sprite path, we then want to you know what? I'm just going to take a look at it. We're going to take a look at what that actual path is, and then we'll figure out from there what we need to do. Because I'm not 100% sure what that variable is going to be at this time. Okay, back to Unity. If I can find the window. Tools, tiles, props import, demon castle, create tiles. At this point, this will be the name with the .png at the end. What is this one? Where does this come from? Oh, I see. We're removing the last element from it, so we'd have to do the same setup. So I think we might want this instead. Sure. Oh, but that's a list of strings. You know what's easiest? What might be easiest is just reversing the operation we did above. To get back to the original path. But even that doesn't have the sprite name in it. But the sprite name is here. And we know that should be identical for the animation. Okay, so if we were to do this, we would get Demon Castle, we'd get sprites Demon Castle animation. I think that's close to what we want. Then we want to do a bit of path combining to get the JSON file name. Wait, how do we just do this in the animator here? How do we find the JSON file? JSON name is equal to the list of strings, and then we just replace PNG with JSON. Okay. This is the list of files. I think we just want to do the same kind of idea. So we're going to take the source file. We're going to replace PNG in this case with controller. Problem is we need to go down a level into this animation folder. It's not at the same level. So yes, we need to replace here. We also need to insert animation into the folder path. Which is why this would be helpful. Because if we grab this prop path, this is essentially the URL up to here, which is animation props. And then if we combine that value with the folder animation, which is where we put all of our controllers, and then add in a name check for controller at the end instead of PNG, I think that would be the path, not to the JSON, but to the animation controller path. And then we could load the animation controller, which I don't know what that is. It's not an animator. An animator has a reference to it. Runtime animator controller. So we should be able to load asset as runtime animator controller. So that's the information we need. So what we'll do is we'll make it so that when we go to create the prop, clean this up as we go, we'll pass in this information like I was originally thinking. And then once we're down in here, then we can do the actual check here. And if the runtime animation controller is not equal to null, then we will try and get a animator on this object, like so. And if we want it to be extra precise, we might want to load a different prefab variant, depending on whether or not this is found. So perhaps we could look here and if the runtime controller is not equal to null, we can update the path to the variant to be a animation version. And that would be a new variant of this one. How do we do that? Create prefab variant, prop, base, animation. Animator. Anim. Sure, it's an anim prop. And we will make it a variation of that. And then this one will have the animator and animation event not a part of it, and this one will. Event receiver. I think that is what we had for the original values. We can check the player. I should have done this beforehand, but it's hard to do because they're variants of each other. If we look at the player, should be the same stuff. So it just had a controller, normal, always animate. Yeah, okay. So if we use this as our parent prefab and we make a variant of it, it will have this extra information for animations. Otherwise, we don't add those scripts and we don't run those scripts. Okay, so then if I delete in the prefab section the anim props, oh, the underscore zero or zero underscore at the front might still be a problem. All right, well, let's see what happens. We're going to put a breakpoint in It's there, and then we're going to attach a debugger, because I think this might still break because of some of the naming conventions of the sprites when it's a multi-sprite. What is our sprite? This is the flickering torch one, so we don't care about this one right now. This one should be fine. We're not breaking for any errors. Yeah, so this sprite comes in as Omni Weapon. What is the controller path? Oh, it is correct, though. This is set up almost... Wait, no. It's doubled. Yeah, I missed a step here. Or misthought about this. So this is going to have this be prefabs anim prop. We want to replace that. This is going to be assets, infinite retries, content art, right down to PNG. Okay, and this is the prop path. So if we undo this, I feel so tired, and I feel like this is not the right way to do this. But I'm just not seeing the other approach. There it is. I found it. We should store this. This is the sprite path. Because this is where we replace it. So if we store it beforehand, then we can use the sprite path down here without having to redo the replace. That'll get it in the right spot, and then this should be... This last name is what we want to get. So string sprite name, because the actual sprite name we're going to get has the 0 in it. So we want to store the last element here as the sprite name, and that's what we replace the PNG part out of. Okay, I still don't know if this is perfect, but it's better. Okay, and then we're going to put the breakpoint back in and try again. Did we save? We did not save. Hopefully this is the correct path this time. Assets, infinite retries, content, art, dungeons, props, sprites, demon castle, animation. Flickering torch. I think that's right just because this happens to be a folder called animation. If we get down to the right one though. Yeah, so this is anim props animation. Okay. We need to delete the flickering prop one or put it in the anim prop folder. Okay, so we're getting a tile path that should be... Sure, I don't love the sprite name having the 0 underscore in the front of it. We could do that as well. We could kind of clean that up and get rid of it. Where does the sprite name come from? From sprite.name. Hmm. We know that this will be the true... This value here, I believe, is an actual name of the sprite. We could send that down. Does it find the controller and everything, though? It does. Ew, it breaks on it. Did it... It's not null, but it won't let me set it. There might be a special way of setting a runtime controller in editor. So it found the animation controller asset, it loaded it up. Oh, did it? Oh, this is the origin prefab location. I am so sleepy. Okay. We hard code these. Yep. Okay, fair. Okay. Didn't actually save before trying to debug it. Not very useful. Alright. Put this here. Do this. Still failing? I think because it's finding it. If we start from scratch, so it actually generates it anew, it should use the right prefab now. And it does. And it has the sprite controller set up. Okay. So this is now generating these correctly. I'm gonna just fix the sprite name as well, I think. String sprite name should be coming in from above because we know that this value doesn't have that 0 in it, which I don't like. It's not as clean. That's good. Now we don't need to do this. I think we would still like to remove final, but we're not needing to use the other information. Here we can just modify it in place, I think. Should be okay. All right. Now if we delete these ones again, create tiles, They should be named without the 0 in their name. And they do. They do have PNG in the name, though. Oh, that's new. Okay, so we'll need to do that as well. Okay. So we're going to get rid of _final. We're going to get rid of .png. Maybe this isn't that much better than having just got rid of 0_ from the front, but then we can delete the entire folder here. It's doing much more thinking now. Stop debugging in case that's causing some issues. Okay, it looks like it generated everything. Naming is back to being normal. Save scene, and then let's hit play and see if everything's still loading up correct after essentially deleting the entire prefab folder and regenerating it. I did see an error for a second. What were those errors? Something to do with graph systems. Could not find this prop. Okay, that probably is fine. We just need to come into this one, and we need to update its name. In fact, I think all we have to do is repopulate now that we've modified some stuff. Yeah. And then this one needs to be cleared because it's no longer found. That's actually something we should probably do at some point for the editor, is auto clear things if they've been deleted. Okay, that seems good. I did see that tree out there. That's probably because we were hitting some errors while trying to generate props, so it never got deleted. Can clear this. Let's come into this one. Let's change this out to the anim variation, and we should be able to do the same thing on this one. See how that looks. Should just work. Does not just work. Didn't hit save, which didn't re-import all our props. Okay, one more time. And that is some candlesticks with a bit of animation on them. I really like the little bit of motion from that and the little bit of motion from the shadow. I think that animation could be way better too. But even just as like a start, I think that looks really good. Okay. And then if we come into here and swap, is it 4.8? Yeah, 4.8, swap this one to the animation version of the display. Now we're going to run into a new problem, which is we are going to need to have some way of controlling these animations. So we built this one so by default it is not animating. And we're going to need to come into here and actually modify it to be in the second state based off of like a cutscene, which shouldn't be too bad. We'll just need to add an extra script to these. Add an extra script to these animation props that'll let us control this. Why did you play once? You're on idle. Oh, because the entry version of this is to that one, so we should set this as the default state instead. I think if we delete these and then regenerate, it should do that. Props, anim sprites. No. Is that based off order? No, idle is first in the list. So why does it generate idle last? Oh, you know what that is? That makes sense, actually. We haven't run into this before because most of our animations happen on our characters and they're controlled by our animation controller, but we've never had to set a default state. And idle is always done last because it needs to have all the other ones set up before it so that it doesn't transition on any looping animations. Okay. So if we make this one looping, save that A-sprite file, export hopefully to the right folders. That looks to be the right folder, and that looks to be the right folder as an array. Export that data. Let's do infinite retries. Props, anim sprites. Just delete all of this and do it from scratch. It's going to start on looping. If we set this as the default behavior, then it should start with it just being there. And then if we activate looping, it'll play that until we tell it to stop. And if we hit this one, oh, because it's not looping, it just immediately exits back to idle. Yeah, so this one, for our purposes, should also be looping. I think having talked out all of the like performance issues with having so many animation sprites and everything, there's also a real case now that like this probably should be broken up into 3 different sprites in this particular use case. Because this one here, we really only need the animation on the back of it. So we probably should do this one as 3 separate props just because it is such a large canvas. Yeah, and that's set up correctly now. Didn't set idle to be the default though, so it will be looping once. Interesting, it only looped once. Oh, because neither of these were set yet. So it did default to this one, but then because nothing set it went back to idle. Interesting. And it doesn't like both of those being set at the same time. Okay. That feels like a good amount of control. Probably should separate this into... Like, Anim 2 could just be a toggle of that sprite when you pick it up. So it could be its own thing. It probably would need the extra transparency, at least the vertical transparency, to be aligned correctly here. But that could just be, instead of an animation, it could just be a toggle. And then this thing, the glow, is fine to be baked into the stand. Because it needs to be the same anyways. It's going to be the same size. But we might want to use this glow in other places too, so if it was separate, that would give us more flexibility. Interesting. Okay. I think what we do in terms of how many frames of animations we have, whether or not we have it as multiple layers, I don't think it can be a hard and fast rule. I think it's gonna need to be a case-by-case basis. Here, makes a ton of sense to combine it all into the candelabra. It's just gonna make it easier to place. We're gonna have a ton of them. This is a one-off, one-time event. It's probably easier to just do it as 3 separate layers for this one, and then try and align the glow behind. Because it doesn't need to be as precise as, like, the flames here. Yeah. It's gonna have to just be use your own judgment. There will not have to be a rule. Okay, cool. But that's controllable animations. The only other thing we'd need to do is have it so that we can actually manipulate those animations by a cutscene, which I think is this thing. What does this do? So this, does this care about the unit at all? Or is this just really controlling a sprite renderer's animations? Set parameter on the animation controller. Set material transparent or alpha clip. That's actually kind of helpful too. Yeah, I think this is just the animation component. It was originally put under like the unit scripts, but I think it's more generic than that now. And it would need access to the sprite renderer. It needs the event controller for some reason. Why does it need the event controller? Oh, someone else must reference it from here. Because it's not used internally. Other things also listen for that animation. To be like, oh, I want to hear when this specific animation controller is being hit. Okay, yeah. Okay. But we'll still set it, but it shouldn't be needed. The animator will be needed. We can set the top and bottom anchors, even though I don't think much is using them at this time. They were meant to be like indications in space where we could have like, hey, we want to anchor something to this top position or this bottom position. But I just haven't been updating them per sprite. Yeah, we've kind of haven't needed that. It's partly because of the fact that we're like turning it sideways, that the top position may not be where you think it should be. I can't remember why we haven't needed that. What's the tween object? What is that supposed to be used for? It's not referenced anywhere here. We get it from the animation. Oh, for punch effects. So to make an enemy feel like they're vibrating. Like they get punched and we kind of move that object. I'm gonna guess that's tile offset. Let's break down this folder of art. Let's take a quick look at the player. Look at their animation script. Sprite destination is the tween object. And then we have 2 references to the transparent and alpha clip. This one and this one. Okay. So we can come back up in here. Sprite destination can be moved. And then we need the materials, which is going to be the bottom 2, this version of alpha clip and this version of transparency. Okay, And then with that being done, when we load in, we should be able to access this object. It will need an entity ID. I don't think it'll have one by default though. So we will need to construct an entity ID for that object so that we can reference it. Because normally the way our sequences work is we have like an entity management system, so we'll need to add like an entity object on here, and this will need to have a specific ID that is not like any other IDs. So it can't be generated into the prop the same way we do for like the, say, the runtime controller. We can't set this when we build it. We will need to set this entity name at the same time that we make the tile offset. So when we construct in the tile in here, we will also need to add an entity component. And we will need to give it an ID. I think this is how we do it elsewhere. Any other spots where we call add? This is directly in the entity manager. This is getting component, add component. Yeah, we just call a init on it. Okay, so we'll have to come up with a unique entity ID. I imagine adding the XY position of the tile data is probably pretty reasonable, so that it's unique per level at the very least, and we won't ever have two levels with the tiles loaded at the same time. So if it's tile data dot position dot X position dot Y, and we can add maybe something unique to this entity, like prop. Maybe that's a better naming convention. I kind of like that the most. So every prop has an ID based off of its position in the world. And then we don't have to know the object name. And if the object changes its name, it doesn't even matter. It's literally just in this room, I expect this cutscene to play and find this object and then play this animation on it. If we ever move the object, we'll need to update the cutscene though in this version. So if we look here at the parent, it has an entity and its ID is prop 67 or 610. Does that match our naming convention here? It does not. This is 48. Lame. So the order that we name these is not the same as the order that they appear in game. Because these numbers are just, they're all labels, they don't really matter. I just wanted to give them different values so it was easy for Drixie and I to be able to communicate about where we want to place a prop. But I didn't validate that they have the exact same positioning. And that's going to matter because if we're going to now use this to be like, oh, I want to modify this prop's animation, I'm going to need to know what that value is. Okay. For the purposes of testing, what we're going to do is we're going to go into the board. We're going to debug spawn all. We're going to make sure that the animation piece here has idle as the default animation that it'll start on. And then we're going to add a sequence or modify the existing sequence for TO4 fully revealed. And we're going to modify it so that it's going to do an animation parameter step, and it's going to be blocking. It's going to find prop, and see, now I have to figure out, I'm going to have to hit play in order to figure out what this is. I'll fix the naming of the labels later so that they match the actual in-game tile positions, so that this is not a thing I have to constantly do. But if we come into here, take a look at this, prop 610 is what we want to be modifying. Go into our cutscene for fully reveal, and this is just placeholder just to make sure that this is working. We're going to modify a bool parameter to true. The bool we want to modify is anim_1. And then we're going to do another parameter, which will also be blocking for no reason. And then we'll do anim2 bool true. Oh, we will also need to turn off this other bool, otherwise we'll have both on at the same time. Cool, and leave that false. Hit save on that. And we should see now that when we load in, it'll reveal the whole room, which will trigger this cutscene. And it should pulse the animation once. And then turn it off, but it didn't turn it off. Did I misname the... No, anim1. Anim1 should have been turned off. Let's hit this to blocking. Maybe it's required that we wait until the animation has been triggered to off. It did animate it though, so it found the prop correctly and did modify it. Before, it won't trigger the reveal until the end of turn, so we can wait until I have this set up. So we're gonna hit forward, hit forward, move. Oh, right. If it's not set to... this is kind of just a weirdness that I forget about the animation system. We need to set it so it's not... Because it's looping, it'll never end. Because it'll end on animation complete. We're going to turn off end on animation complete, and we're going to give it a hard duration. And then this shouldn't need to be blocking. I think I've set this up in code to work. I haven't tried doing this in the editor version of sequences though. It does not seem to be ending the animation. Okay. So what we'll do then is I gotta figure out why that's broken, but we're just gonna add a delay step then. So we're gonna do delay, and we're gonna delay for 1 second, which should be what this was doing with this button ticked off, but it was not. So we'll manually set it up. So this will be non-blocking. So it'll trigger the animation. It'll then go to wait for 1 second. Once that 1 second is done, then it'll turn off the animation and then set the second one to looping. That also did not work. Interesting. I saw it flicker just for a moment, it toggled off. So this should be respecting this value. So if this is unticked, it should be setting that animation parameter to false. There's some sort of bug with this. Let's add another delay. Base, delay, 1 second. And see what happens here. Try a couple other things. we are way over time now. Oh. I'm not sure why this one is getting toggled off immediately. I feel like it's something to do with the way these parameters are being set. Set the duration to 0 and end on animation complete to false. Yeah, so something about these is not, like, it's working, it's not clear though what I have to set. But that's doing what I want. I want to debug and try and figure out why, like, I had to toggle off end on complete and change the duration to 0 in order for this to stay toggled. I also just want to see this happening in the animator window as well. So this is looping on idle. I take a step forward, it plays the loop, it goes back to idle, and then it goes to looping. Okay. Oh, is it that maybe I'm misremembering what end animation on complete does? Maybe this being ticked causes the parameter to toggle off automatically once it's played once, even if it is a looping animation. That might be what the problem is. I'm going to try this as a variation. Does this work? No, that doesn't block long enough for this one to play out, even though it's set to blocking. Okay. So there's some logic that's a little weird with modifying animation parameter, but that's not really a problem with the animating props per se. Yeah, it needs that hard-coded delay. I need to break for lunch, and then I will be back in about 40 minutes or so to do a stream with Drixie. Animation props are here. There's some optimizations I'd like to do in the future, but we can now make props that animate. We can bring them in. They'll generate props correctly, and we can even grab their entity IDs. I just need to separately fix the labels to match the naming convention here, which is probably just an ordering problem. But like I said, the labels don't really matter. They're just kind of generated independent of every other system. So I just need to figure out how to get them in alignment. I'm pretty happy with this. It took a little longer than I would have liked at 3 hours and 20 minutes to get this working. I'm also, like I said, I've been a bit tired today, but I am happy that I got on stream and solved some of these problems, worked some things out, and definitely put some new problems and rabbit holes in my mind to kind of think about. We'll come back in a bit at 40 minutes from now for more of an art stream. I might let Drixie drive a little bit and just kind of relax, but